Right. So, hello, Nana. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
So, just say your name, when you were born, and where you were born.
Right. I was born in 1931 in the Rotunda Hospital in Dublin.
And what was
My
your
name is.
Yeah.
I was christened Margaret O'Donoghue in 1931.
And what was your first memory of Dublin?
Was in hospital, in Clonskeagh Hospital, as a 3-year-old child. I got scarlet fever and I was admitted to hospital. And while I was there, I got chicken pox. So I was there a bit longer than the family expected, and I hardly knew what they looked like because they weren't allowed to visit me while I was in hospital, and I didn't know what they looked like when I got home after about 3 months in hospital.
And you had scarlet fever, didn't you? Have diphtheria? Was that the other?
Diphtheria later on.
Oh.
That was in 1939.
Okay.
38, 39.
And
I had.
There had been was it 1929? There was the Spanish flu, wasn't there?
There was, but
that's just before you were born.
Just before.
But so there was lots of viruses and illnesses.
And polio and all kinds of things. But I didn't get those. I just got the scarlet fever first, and then the chicken pox, and then in 1938, at the end of 1938, just before the war started, I got diphtheria. And my mother took me on the tram to Cork Street Hospital to have me checked out, and they kept me in because I had diphtheria.
So what was the centre of town look like in the 30s? Was it? Did you still have the, where the Lewis line goes now? Was that a tram line?
That was tram lines then, and there wasn't as much traffic because there was a shortage of petrol. People had to use gas. Anyone who had a car had a tent over the roof of the car, and it was full of gas. And it was rationed, gas was rationed. So they could only run the car as long as they had a ration of gas. You had to be important to get the gas, be doctors or...
And so what was it like? So when did you first start school? In 1936, was it, or?
In 1936.
Six, yeah.
Yes, I went to the Holy Faith Convent in Glasnevin with the nuns.
Wasn't a happy experience, was it, or was it?
No, not really. But who was happy then? I don't know how to say.
Yeah.
That people were very worried about the world situation at the time, because we were going to have rationed food and there was no leaving the country anymore because it wasn't safe to leave the country.
And did you, like at the time, were you aware of maybe the poverty at the time, or was that just a normal everyday thing? It
was all around us, but we all thought we were very well off. But it wasn't. We knew that. I saw children with no shoes.
Yeah. And
I saw little boys wearing raggedy trousers. Never thought anything of it because we were used to looking at it. And there were a lot of tenements when the big Georgian houses were left empty when England left Ireland. They were bought over by people who rented out one room to a family, and some of those houses had 20 rooms in them, and there could be 20 families living in one house, and there was no bathroom. There was an outdoor toilet in the back garden, and there was a coal tap, and if you wanted to wash clothes or you wanted to wash yourself or your children, you had to boil up the water in whatever way you could, and you had a galvanized bath. You put that in the front room or whatever room you had rented, and that's how you washed your children and you washed your clothes.
So, do you remember much about school and how did the nuns act around children? Were they just, do they see you as kind of less than them, or what was the interaction?
They didn't look happy.
Yeah.
For starters, we weren't happy to be there because we were frightened of the nuns, because there was one particular nun who had something wrong with her leg. I don't know what it was, but she had a walking stick. And I remember her when I was very young in her class, her coming into the classroom, and she used the crook of the walking stick to pull a child out by her neck into the standing up place because she hadn't been able to answer a question. But that's how you were taught. You were taught by fear, and you were kept in fear to keep you under control.
And there was in 32 there was the Eucharistic Congress, was there? Was that 1932?
32.
So
I was only one at that time, so I wouldn't have remembered it. But I do remember my parents talking about it. It was, everything was stopped for the Eucharistic Congress, which was held in O'Connell Street. And John McCormack sang, and that's the only name I can remember.
Like after after Ireland got independence from Britain, that's how they was De Valera, or who was it that he wanted to make the Catholic Church the foremost institution?
Well, when the English left, somebody had to take charge, so the Catholic Church took charge under De Valera. But De Valera, as far as we were concerned, did what he was told by the Catholic Church. Everything had to go through the Catholic Church.
But he was also a devout Catholic, was he?
Very, very much so. Yeah. But a lot of people were. A lot of people were.
And what was what was kind of the tradition around school? Because now it's, you most people go on to get a third level education, they get a qualification, but I'm sure for you it was very different. What was the kind of, how long were you expected to stay in school?
As little as possible, because girls weren't considered as important as boys. So you wouldn't educate a girl in those days, wasting time giving them an education, because they were only going to get married or be servants or something like that. So lowly job. Girls weren't important, the boys were, because they were going to provide for a family. So they had to have some trade or profession to earn money, but that's how it worked.
And so coming into the late 30s, then you're kind of 9 or 10. And what do you first remember about the start of World War II? Do you remember?
I remember hearing the sound of the English Prime Minister saying on the radio that we are at war.
Was that Neville Chamberlain?
Yes, yeah. And I also remember that there was a talk about taking back some ports that we had around. I can't remember now the exact ports they were, but England had given us back a whole lot except for the 6 counties.
Yes.
And some of the ports they had, but they were using. And then when the war broke out, then there was talk of England's going to take back the 3 ports because it would be useful for them. And De Valera wouldn't agree to it, so we were in difficulty then.
Yeah. But, and there was there my experience of World War II has only been through learning about it and seeing it in films and on TV. But was there did you see any of Hitler's speeches in the cinema or?
Yes, on the
Yeah.
newsreels.
Okay, on the
If
newsreels.
we had a cinema at Stephen's Green called
Yeah.
the Green Cinema,
Okay.
and on Saturday morning, children could go queue and go in to see a film, and with the main film, there was a newsreel, and you could see all these speeches that Hitler made, and we thought he was absolutely nuts because he was shouting and roaring. There was actually spit coming out of his mouth on the film. You could see it when he was shouting. But that's how he controlled people. And then everybody would raise their hand in the crowd around him and say, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. But I'm not sure that they even knew what he was talking about because he was just controlling people.
Was there, because in actually where the area that we live in is it used to be, and I think it still, or I'm not sure about now, but it used to be a very big Jewish area in Dublin.
It was.
And was there the same anti-Semitism, was that around in Ireland, or was it
Yes.
more concentrated in Europe?
No, there was anti-Semitism everywhere because of religion.
Yeah.
What we were taught, the Jews crucified Jesus.
Even though he was a Jew himself.
Even though I never knew he was a Jew until I read
really?
about. No,
No.
never knew. No, but that wasn't said.
That's so bizarre, isn't it?
No,
That's crazy.
it was never mentioned to us at school that he was a Jew. I knew he was an Arab, but I didn't know he was a Jew. I came across that information later on.
And what was the because Ireland was neutral, but what was the reporting like on World War II? Was it, I mean, what information did you get about it through the war?
Well, we knew when Hitler was winning. Everybody was a bit concerned about it, and how to keep Ireland neutral was uppermost in everybody's mind. And the fact that we couldn't import food, we had to just use whatever food we could grow or whatever food we could buy here, which was healthy, but we thought it was not nice.
So what was the ration, what were you allowed to have?
You could have a couple of ounces of butter a week,
Yeah.
a couple of ounces of tea,
Yeah.
and you had to have coupons for clothes. You couldn't go into a shop to buy clothes without these coupons. There was a scarcity of everything because a lot of manufacturing wasn't done in Ireland up to the time that England left. It was imported. I think it was imported, but there weren't many manufacturers in Ireland at that time. And coming towards the end of the war, there was a shipment of American shoes arrived in Ireland to go to Cleary's, and there was queues all morning outside Cleary's to get in to buy these American shoes because we had nobody producing shoes that we would wear if you could have the money to buy them in the first place.
And what was did people know whose side to be on? Obviously Hitler, it was clear that Hitler was a very disturbed and he was the aggressor, but did people have any strong hatred towards Britain? Did they want Britain to lose, or did they want...
No, we didn't have any hatred towards Britain unless you were looking for a job. You had to go to England to get a job. There were no big employers in Ireland at that time except Guinness. And you had to put up with the fact that a lot of landladies in England, because you couldn't buy a house when you went to get a job in England, you wouldn't have had the money to buy a house, and you might not have had the money to pay rent. But a lot of landladies would have a notice in their windows saying, no blacks, Irish or dogs.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yes, but we all seem to accept it. What could we have done about it?
Mm. Yeah, well, it was a pretty prevailing. I mean, racism and discrimination wasn't just German. It was seemed to be a thing that was around the world at that period of time.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you remember the end of the war? Do you remember what, like, it coming to an end, or hearing that it had been over?
I do remember the end of the war. Everybody was out partying on the streets, and it was very exciting. But we already had what was called an air raid shelter where I lived. I lived in Westmoreland Street.
Yeah.
That's the centre of town. And we had this huge building. It was about I think there were about 6 foot walls, no windows. And when the air raid siren sounded, which they did a couple of times in Dublin, you were to run out of your house and go into these air raid shelters and stay there until the air raid siren went again to say the danger is past. I think there were about 3 planes dropped bombs in Dublin at that time. And there were people killed. Clontarf, and there was near, not far from here, there was a bomb dropped, and I think it was that the planes were trying to ditch their bombs before they got the trip back home. They couldn't bring the bombs back because they hadn't got enough fuel.
Yeah, there was a plan by Germany to invade Ireland as well.
There was.
I think it was.
But I think England would have taken over before.
That's true. Yeah, and was there, because there was kind of a back and forward between De Valera and Churchill.
There was.
And do you think that Britain maybe resented Ireland for staying neutral?
I have no doubt they did. But we were only a small country, and we had just come out from under the 700 years of the English, so we weren't likely going to give up what we felt was freedom. Yeah.
And so by the end of the war, you were a late teenager? You're almost in your 20s?
I was 14.
Oh no, 40. Okay.
In 1944.
Okay, so you're still a teenager. So the war
finished in 45.
Yeah.
I think.
And were you expected to work at that stage? Yeah.
Yeah. Most children finish school in 7th class.
Okay.
And when you got to that, there was no chance of you going to secondary school if you didn't have money. And a lot of families just didn't have the money. Because there were big families then. Now, there were 4 in my family, 4 children in my family. But there wasn't a hope of getting a place in secondary school and pay for books.
Was there still because I know that Trinity until...
had a ban on Catholics.
Yeah.
Yes.
So was it mainly Protestant families that went to secondary schools?
Well, it would be people who had money, and it was mostly Protestant families.
Yeah.
Because it seems like that English families didn't have as many children, or the ones who lived here didn't have as many children as Catholic families. Yeah. Catholic families always seem to have big families.
But there was also the economic, I suppose, if you have more kids,
you have more children, you have to feed them, and there'd be less chance of them.
Yeah, but you also have, if you're poor and you have more kids, there's a better chance that, number one, they'll survive.
Yeah.
Or at least some of them will survive.
Some of them will
and then also some of them will earn a living and help out, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
It's less pressure, I think, if you're economically well off to have a lot of kids. It's more of a personal preference.
You wouldn't be economically well off if you had a lot of children.
No.
Living in maybe 1-2 rooms.
Yeah, it's insane.
In these Georgian buildings, because there were no corporation houses built until the English had left. Yeah. And then they started to build houses in Ballyfermot. but there were no buses for people to come back into town.
Mm.
And when they got houses in Ballyfermot, they felt isolated because they had left all their friends and maybe some of their families in the centre of town in the tenements.
Mm.
And there was a better community spirit
Mm.
in the tenements
Mm.
than being out in Ballyfermot
Mm.
with a house and no friends around you
Yeah.
to give a hand.
And all these areas were all like, they were all countryside, were they?
They were countryside.
All
Yeah.
these areas that we'd now consider
That's it, yeah.
city.
No houses.
No houses.
No houses.
And so coming into was my perception looking back is that the 1950s and 60s, like while society was obviously, especially Irish society, was still predominantly in the control of the Catholic Church, but that there was a certain level of progression towards something like women having a bit of a different, like they were, at least the conversation was happening, maybe not in Ireland, but around the world, about the role of women.
Yes.
You know, what was society, what was the values.
Well, at the end of the war, there were less men coming back. And during the war, women were taking jobs because there were no men, no young men left to do those jobs. And at the end of the war, the women didn't want to go back to the way they were. They wanted to keep working because it gave them a bit of independence. They weren't dependent on the husband or whoever providing a wage, because if there were no jobs, or if if the men weren't willing or able when they came back from the war to take the jobs that were on offer, the women had jobs. They did all menial jobs because they wouldn't have had an education, a lot of them, to take on.
And at what age did you meet my grandfather? Was that
Not when I was 19.
when you were 19? And did you get married? You got married at 21, was it, or no?
No, we wanted to get married, but I didn't want to get married until I had a house.
Oh, okay.
So we had to save up a deposit. £100 was a deposit for a house,
£100, really?
which was a lot of money.
Well, so I'm trying to think about, I wonder what the like equivalent is, because to me that just sounds, I mean, £100 now is like,
It's like take away money.
you wouldn't, you'd just about, yeah, you'd get 2 meals
Right.
out somewhere
yeah.
for that, like.
But it was, you see, wages were very small.
Yeah, and inflation hadn't happened, and
Inflation happened. I can't believe how quickly inflation came on board, because the first house that we saved up the £100 deposit for cost £1,500.
whoa,
And we
1,500.
got 1,400 of a loan from the county council at 4.5%. And we were delighted with ourselves because we had this house. Now, we didn't own it. The council, the bank or the council owned it, but we got the loan of £1,400. And we had also saved up enough money to buy a bedroom suite, a kitchen, and a dining room and a sitting room, because your grandpa was working in England for a number of those years, and I sent him £2 in an envelope every week to save, and he didn't spend it. He put it in the post office in England.
So, what was the 50s and I'd say the 60s as well? Was there a big push towards consumerism in Ireland? Was
and
did that ramp up after the war?
yes, young people wanted to have a bit of fun, so there were a lot of dances organised, and there were a lot of people who were going on holidays. Not far now, but they were going on holidays because they'd been pent up and kept quiet for so long during the war, and we never thought the war would end. We never thought of anything only existing and surviving when the war was on, because we, being a small country,
Hmm.
you were at the mercy of whoever won
Of course, yeah.
the war.
And
So,
was America a big influence on Ireland's
oh,
culture?
huge. A lot
Yeah.
of people went to live in America.
Yeah.
And it was after Pearl Harbor that America came into the war.
Hmm.
And only for America coming into the war, Hitler said he would have won the war.
No, yeah, for sure. But do you think that because at the time in America they had a after the war they had a sort of big boom. They had like the baby boomers, and they sort of gave a template for other countries to follow.
Yes.
And do you think that like when was the first time? Do you remember? How long, or was Coca-Cola a thing in Ireland when you were growing up, or did it become bigger, or when did that kind of like shift towards big
business?
Big business, yeah.
Well, everybody looked to America for a pattern.
Yeah.
And we sort of got parcels sent from America. If you had any relative in America, they used to send you their used clothes.
Hmm.
But that was a good thing to get, because there were no manufacturing businesses here making clothes. That all started shortly after the war.
Mm.
You know, we looked to England and to America for our ideas about fashion,
Mm-hmm.
and America particularly. And then films were a great thing. There were always queues outside cinemas to go in to see a particular film because of the musicals and the clothes. We were all anxious to copy the clothes.
And I always remember that you and my granddad were both very you had a very you had an amazing ability to resist sort of what I always remember you saying that you didn't kind of sort of like you didn't go to mass or anything or like that. You kind of just said, well, you know.
Well, we did go to mass when we were children.
Yeah.
Because we were brought.
Yeah.
And it was a question of, we didn't like the idea that the English had gone and the church was prepared to dictate to everybody how they should live. And as a matter of fact, it was said by a lot of people that the priest wanted to be in the bedroom.
That's pretty true.
Because they were telling you how you were to live, how many children you were to have. And of course, the priests were looked after they had a housekeeper to look after them. And they were given enough money to feed themselves and to live properly. But a lot of the families who had big families, they couldn't feed all the children that they had.
And what was
it? The money to feed
them. What do you think? Were you always? Did both of you always question what was going on around you? Like, were you critical of? Did you think critically about the ideas? I mean, it always astounds me that you had first of all you had the sort of awareness, and then second of all you also had the ability to say no, we didn't want to live that way in a society that was so pressurized to live in that way.
We didn't, no, we didn't.
But that's very
because
impressive.
We felt we could make our own decisions.
That's amazing. I find that amazing under the conditions, because it was such a powerful force.
It was a powerful force. They did try to influence it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it didn't work. They did.
When was it that you felt that the conversation about women's rights or women's role in society became sort of to gather momentum? What decade do you think that you felt that?
Well, I think in the 50s, when I met your papa.
Yeah.
I had an idea in my head of what way I wanted to live. I didn't want to live the way my parents had lived.
Yeah.
I wanted to I don't know what I wanted, but I would have recognised it when I was with the partner I had decided to be with. But at the same time, we couldn't go very far out of line because you would have been ostracised if you didn't keep the rules. We didn't talk about it. We talked among ourselves about it, but we didn't talk to other people. But neighbours were inclined to report you if you didn't go to church, which sounds strange.
It's crazy, but it's a thing that happens, isn't it? I mean, that happened in communist societies as well, about outing people. And so in the coming into the late 60s, so you had the in America you had the counterculture movement against the Vietnam War, and you had,
which was dreadful.
And you had a big shift, especially in America. Do you think that happened at all in Ireland, or did Ireland stay fairly similar?
Ireland stayed much the same. It wasn't until we started to hear the stories of what happened with children and priests.
And when did you start first hearing those stories?
When I was about 18 or 19.
Really, you heard then?
Yes, that there were rumours.
Jeez.
But you wouldn't have spoken
Yeah,
about
of course,
it.
yeah.
You would hear these things, and at first you'd be saying, oh, that couldn't be true. That couldn't. But when 3 or 4 young men took an action against, we'll say, 2 or 3 priests, you began to say, there must be some truth in what they are saying, otherwise they wouldn't be taken into court. And they were vilified.
Yeah, of course.
Those men. I can remember them being vilified, and everybody objected to what they were doing and what they were saying. Couldn't be true. But obviously it was true.
Yeah. And so what was I remember you told me a really funny story about my granddad learning to drive a car, that he just sort of got in someone just sort of got him in a car and then just said,
you turn the key and drive. And he did that. It was a new Sunbeam that we had saved up the money for. I think it was £300. And he got in the car. Some person he knew in business said, Usher, I'll get in beside you and I'll tell you what to do. And he got in beside him and told him how he was to drive. He came back to Greentrees Road with the new car, and I think he had 2 or 3 drives with this particular man, and he said, you're grand now. But there wasn't as much traffic.
There was less cars,
I think we were the first in our family to have a car.
But when did you learn to drive? Like,
I was 50 years old by the time.
But do you think that was a societal thing, or do you think that was just your own preference?
I didn't have a need for a car because we had to be very careful with what we spent money on.
Yeah.
Not that we were poor, but we wanted to be able to pay our bills and to live and to educate. We had 2 daughters first, so we wanted to educate them.
Yeah.
And the first time that your papa was talking to people he worked with, and he mentioned the fact that his daughter wanted to go to Trinity, and he was told he was foolish. What do you want to be educating your daughters for? Because they're only going to get married.
Oh my God.
So that was said. So he just said, well, it's a decision we've made.
Yeah, it's so I still think it's very impressive that you both had, because you could very easily crumble and just say, oh yeah, you're right, no, our daughters shouldn't get educated. You could.
Well, we were strong.
But that's good,
We had discussed all of these things. We had 4 years before we were engaged for 4 years. And we could talk about anything between ourselves in those times. And we did talk about, he told me what he wanted to do, and I would tell him what I wanted to do. because we observed how other families lived, and we decided on what would be best for us, what would keep us happy if we had children.
And when in Ireland did music and film and the sort of entertainment things that we have now, when do they start to sort of grow or become?
Immediately after the war.
Immediately after, but when were they like, because I know that the church had a lot of control in terms of censoring.
Oh, they did censor a lot of things, and they did stop girls from doing sports. It wasn't seemly, it was said by a particular bishop.
Really?
It wasn't seemly for girls to be exercising or to be showing their bodies. In other words, showing their arms and their legs. It wasn't seemly, he said.
That's, I mean, I don't know where they got that from, but
because this would be losing control. If they had control of women, they controlled the birth rate.
Yeah. But
because
and
women
when
would be afraid to commit sin.
and how like how long did they block things like, they had contraception and various different updates in technology to try to help women? How much pushback was it?
They controlled the doctors.
Really, they control the doctors.
You weren't allowed to buy contraception.
Gee.
They didn't have contraception in Ireland. If you wanted to control your family and use contraception, you had to go to the north of Ireland to buy contraceptives.
It's like the fireworks.
And the police were at West Amiens Street Station when all these ladies were coming back, and they were taking away the contraceptives.
I can't. That's insane.
It's hard to imagine.
It is hard.
Isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's crazy.
And then there were a certain group of women who wanted not to have a lot of children, and sometimes they knew somebody who would help them have an abortion. And there were a lot of women who died because of that. But it didn't change in Ireland the rules because women died in having an abortion or in getting having an operation done on themselves. It didn't change what was done.
And do you think that that created a lot of, like, were lots of women, maybe not outwardly, but were they internally angry or frustrated?
Of course they were, but they were afraid of being pointed at or being talked about by doing anything at all that was against what we were being taught in school, that you had to have you were to leave yourself open to have as many children as possible.
It's very
barbaric.
It is barbaric, but the funny thing is that I think it's like there's a period, especially in Western society, where this became a really predominant thing. I mean, if you look at other cultures from around the world, they seem to have maybe women didn't have as much freedom, but they at least had a lot more respect, it seems, for the role of women in society, at least in terms of being able to be a mother, or to be just respectful towards women. Maybe that's just my opinion, but like, it's ridiculous to think that a society, especially Ireland, basically treated women as second-class citizens.
Well, they were second-class citizens until after the war, and then they started to become assertive a little bit, because women were not prepared to put up with being not allowed to have freedom to do what they wanted. They had to do what was directed by either their husbands or the church.
Yeah. And what was your memory of things like, this is a bit of a aside, but just because I think it's really funny, is like Eurovision, because Eurovision was a massive thing in Ireland,
It was.
and it was like Ireland were really successful at it. We had a lot of we won it a lot of times, but was there like were people really excited and
They
anticipated?
were,
Yeah.
because there weren't many things to be excited
Okay.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you weren't in the church praying, you were up to mischief. But that was the impression
Yeah.
you got. There were things like sodalities.
Okay.
That's people got together to pray together.
Mm.
And the expression was, the family that prays together stays together.
Okay.
Which I thought was a bit silly.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you? So the thing that I find kind of sad about it is that I think it's a nice. There is something nice about the idea of like a community, and you go to this place, but it's like, you know, to say, oh yeah, you know, peace be with you, that's kind of nice, but it's amazing how that can be then used as a way to control people.
And that it was very important to control
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't got control, you can't have your system in place. But it all fell apart.
And when did you feel like that system start? Like, when did the schooling system start to change? Like, was there all, like, most people in Ireland went to either a school run by nuns or priests.
That's
And when did there were other options, but
there were ordinary folk
Yeah.
were allowed to go then to college, and they could be teachers. And usually what happened was, with the big families that were in it, especially from the country, one child grew up to be a priest. Another child would grow up to be a nun. Another child grew up to be a teacher. And then if there were lesser and lesser and lesser. But once there was a nun and a priest.
And there's a doctor. Doctor was a big thing as well.
Yes, a very
That's
big
still today. Doctor is still seen as a very, especially like leaving cert wise. The doctor is the kind of most. We don't have the priest thing anymore, but
No,
the
we
doctor
don't,
is
isn't
still
that-
doctor
we
is
don't
still.
have the nun thing
No.
anymore either.
No, and when was the ban lifted on Catholics to Trinity? When did that happen?
When Alison started.
So that was early 70s
That
or
was 70 what? I think it was 72, 73.
that's insane. It really is insane.
Yeah, but that's the truth.
And do you remember much about Northern Ireland going on at the time? Like, were you?
Oh, it
was it constant?
dreadful. Yes, it was a constant. On the news every morning,
Yeah.
we would hear about somebody being shot, or we were always terrified of it coming down.
And where were you when the bomb happened in Dublin?
Oh, wait, I think now. But that was in the war years.
No, but there was the union.
Oh, that's when Alison and Wilma were going to the College of Music.
Yeah.
They would have been in secondary school at that time, and there was a bomb, but it was never claimed. Nobody claimed.
Yeah.
It was suggested that it was the north of Ireland, but I don't know whether it was or not. You see, how do you get proof
Yeah.
of these things?
It was a very difficult situation. And do you think that what was people's response, or what was people's feelings towards it in Dublin? Like, were they pro? Did people care? Did people want a united Ireland? Did people have any interest, or they just wanted to stop, really?
We knew there was no way that the North would ever agree, and there was nothing that could be done. They would have still been killing each other, and we just have to hope now that they won't go back to killing each other.
It's a big, especially with Sinn Féin. I think it's a danger that
there is. But what does one do about it?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
And what was your memory of the 80s? Was that again from watching? I mean, I watched a lot of Reeling in the Years. Like, I like watching things about Irish society and its change. And was there a cultural change? I know music drove a lot of
It did.
different
Yes.
groups, and there was kind of like, you had punk, and you had various different sort of haircuts and things like that. Wait, did you know that was that sort of shocking to people? Were people shocked by these new
Not
looks?
really.
No.
We were anxious to move on, and we liked to copy England.
Okay.
A lot of the styles and fashions came from England and from America to England
Yeah.
as well. But it was a taste of freedom
Yeah.
for young people. And then, of course, drugs started,
Yes.
and a lot of young people got involved in.
Yeah, it was a big problem,
And there
especially in
was.
Dublin.
Yes, there was.
Um,
There still is.
There still is, but that was when I know it was the beginning of Charles Haughey's first thing when heroin came to Dublin.
It was. Yeah.
I don't know what year that was. Maybe late 70s, was it, or?
It would have been the late 70s, but I don't imagine that any of us would say that Charlie Haughey was a saint.
No, I just know that he was involved, or maybe not involved, but I remember it being, there was someone who was trying to help. I can't remember his name. You might know it. Who was helping in the inner city with the drug problem? I can't remember his name, but I just remember him being around at the same time as Charles Haughey. But what was there a clash between the sort of old system? Because I still feel like that's today, whereas you have the old system. You have like people, and people can be religious, whatever. It's a free country. I just think that there's still the cultural clash between new ideas and the old way in Ireland. And did you think that, was there ever, because there was loads of these conversations around, was art acceptable? Was it,
We
defamatory?
had censorship
Yeah,
of everything.
yeah,
Censorship of films, of books, of what you could do, what was acceptable, behaviour. And
but was it seen as, was this new culture seen as like sinful, or did the Catholic Church detest it or try to like
well, they
push it
tried
down?
to stop us moving forward.
Yeah,
If we felt we were moving forward, the Catholic Church did not feel we were moving forward, because it meant they were losing control.
yeah,
So I'm not so sure how much attention people pay now to.
they don't pay much now, but I won't. But the thing is that, like, I mean, I only had religion in my primary school. Then I went to a non-denominational secondary school. But like, I can imagine that the indoctrination and the kind of propaganda was so much higher in people's minds in the 70s and the 80s than it is now.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
It was the reason that I started to question. It's a funny story, but it wasn't funny at the time. I remember when we were going out to Mass on Sundays, we went as a family to Mass. And my mother was steeping peas. I'm sure I told you this story before. She was steeping peas for Sunday dinner. And you would leave your peas in a bowl of water, marrowfat peas. And as I was going out the door, I took a pea out of the steeping peas and I ate it. And I suddenly realised, oh, I should have been fasting from 12 o'clock last night. Now I can't go up to communion, because we all went up to communion. And at the same time, I was terrified to say that to my parents, because I would be in trouble. I shouldn't have broken my fast by eating the pea. So when I got to the church, I made the decision, what am I going to do? Am I going to say nothing, go up to communion, and face the fact that I might be struck dead as I'm walking back from communion? So I went up and I got communion. Happily, I got communion. And nothing happened to me walking back down. So I began to question.
But you know what the really funny thing is that now fasting is becoming a really big thing because it's really good for you.
Yes.
Like, it's funny how traditions like that, they're actually
they're good.
within it.
in
There's
some
something
ways.
really
Yeah.
good.
Yes.
But
But not
it's
when they're forced.
no,
on.
not when they're forced upon you. But I find it amazing, like how like there's one study that I had done or I read this year for college, and it was that people who have some sort of faith, they have 8 year longer life expectancy than people who don't, which is
Right.
incredible.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's incredibly impinging upon people's freedom if it's like institutionalized religion, like the way it is.
Yeah.
It was in Ireland.
But it was a way of, you didn't have to make a choice. You knew what you were supposed to do.
Yeah,
And it took away any decision making.
yeah, which is not, I don't think is a good thing.
It's not a good thing,
No.
but it saved people having to make a choice.
Yeah, that's, I suppose it's maybe nice to kind of, I suppose it's nice to give you a bit of a framework, but I think you go mental if you're that rigid.
Yes, and a lot of women were very rigid.
Yeah.
They wouldn't do anything without consulting the priest first.
Oh my God.
That was usually the way. It was usually the woman in the house
Yeah.
was more religious because it suited, I suppose. She had something to believe in.
Yeah. Or something to do.
Or something to do, maybe that's it. But it was when you went to confession once a week, Saturdays, and you would tell the priest everything, and he would either give out to you or tell you were doing all right. And if you wanted a decision to be made about whether you would do A or B, he would tell you which was the right one.
Wow. I mean, I can't even imagine living in. I mean, I think not that we don't. No one my age suffers from the lack of having the Catholic Church. It's a great thing that the country's moved on. I think maybe we have the other extreme of where we actually are so free to do what we want to do that we don't know what to do. Whereas then maybe you had the other extreme of where you were so restricted.
Yeah.
That
we didn't have to make a choice.
You didn't have to make a choice, which is another extreme, which is not good either.
No, it's not. But if you're told what the consequences would be, if you drink too much or if you take drugs too much, or if you know that and then you make a choice, but hopefully you'd make the right choice.
Yeah, I feel like it's I think the one thing, the danger, it's not danger, maybe it's an overcorrection, but I think that we may as like a step past it, we may push really far before we come back to, like, people will take it way too far in terms of trying to break free of the restraints that religion put on people, especially in Ireland. I mean, I think there seems to be just this, which I get, and I kind of agree with to a certain point, is that like people just want to be totally free of whatever that controlling so I don't know what I don't know why it was so important to people to police what other people didn't do. It just
yes, you see, that's the way the church worked. They controlled everything, and they built big churches that are now left empty and not being used.
Yeah, I find it fascinating because it's not something that I have experience of, and I can't believe that this country only a number of decades ago was like that. And when was it 1994 that homosexuality was decriminalized or something like that?
I think it's as late as that. Yes.
And was that a massive uproar?
What? You didn't know anybody who was. Oh, no, there was no such thing.
None of the
in
nuns
Ireland,
or
none
of the nuns or the priests.
Not at
No,
all.
no.
No, there wasn't.
No, it didn't happen here.
Because we didn't hear about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And you could be imprisoned.
And so when what age were you in the like end of the 80s, early 90s? What were you were?
Well, I'm now we're in 2023 and I'm 92.
Yeah.
So
Were you
there's a
in your
world
50s or
of
40s?
difference between the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. There's a world of difference between then and now.
But so what are the in the last, let's say from the 90s? So my viewpoint of the 90s is, I mean, I was born in 98, but my viewpoint of the 90s, number one, it comes a lot from music. That's what, because I listen to a lot. I would listen to a lot of music, and I'd hear it from the 90s. But I see the 90s as like a bridge between
the old world
and the new world.
Yes.
Like where technology was increasing.
Yes.
You had basically the any sort of remaining powers of the church. I mean, they still have some, but I mean that kind of like their overarching sort of as a major institution sort of started to crumble a little bit then.
Yes.
And then you also had, the EU.
Yes.
Europe.
But once the EU came in, we were joined up with people who were free to be educated and free to be all kinds of things they wanted to be. That freedom didn't come into Ireland until late in the 90s, I think, as far as I can remember now.
And do you remember like computers and phones and things like that becoming a part of?
I do. Yeah. I do remember that you could actually leave your house without thinking of bringing a phone with you, because you knew that whoever was ringing you, if they didn't get an answer to your home phone, they would ring late in the evening and know you would be in. You didn't have to have a phone with you. Now you can't go anywhere without somebody getting in touch with you or wanting something. And no matter where you are, if you actually hear it.
Yeah, no, but that's fair enough. But it's when did my other memories of kind of that, well, when I was young and growing up, was that there more and more the connection between Ireland and Europe increased, as in Ireland stopped being for a long time. I think Ireland was defined by its relationship with Britain.
Yes.
So that was because of the proximity. It was just was,
and so many had to go to England to get work because there was no work here for them. And
do you, like, what was your experience of going abroad? How did that change? Did it change?
It changed when your papa got a job where he needed to go to Europe to buy commodity for the shops, and we started to go on holidays then, but it was a big adventure. There was a lot of planning to it. Now you can hop on a plane at an hour's notice, or you can decide to go somewhere to Timbuktu and you can go within a short space of time, and nobody would inquire, why do you want to go there? And you don't always have to give an explanation for why you're doing anything. You're going on holidays, and that's what it is. Or business or whatever.
I often feel like I feel a bit because I have an interest in coins and various different and I feel like the EU is great from like making travel easier.
Yes.
But I really don't. I wish they could have come up with a system of where we just had like the euro, but everyone kept their old currencies.
Right.
So like the Irish currency and the because even the coins that I would have from like the 70s and the 80s, most countries in Europe, they had their own like their own individual currency with its own individual design, which I find so fascinating. So like I love them. They're so distinct.
It is nice, but it's easier if
it's
you've all got the same.
It's definitely easier. I just wondered, could they anyway? But so I remember you also saying to me before, or I've heard it, that like when you went to Dublin Airport, you used to be able to, like, you know, take photos on the runway,
Yes.
and you know, which I just think is the funniest thing ever. Obviously after 9/11 happened, you know,
That changed. Yeah.
But I'm just interested in, was there a moment where that kind of consumerism or capitalism increased a lot, like the pace of and consumerism push increased in Ireland?
I think it happened when more visitors started to come to Ireland and we heard more stories
Okay.
of how other people lived, especially the Americans. When they came here, they were able to bring a lot into Ireland that we didn't know about.
Yeah.
And I know television changed a lot of people's way of living, because we were able to see houses from other countries, how they were built, and we were able to see about history. We were able to learn about history from places that we saw on the television.
Yeah.
And we took note of all those. We didn't have the information coming in when I was young, when I was a child. We didn't have television, for starters.
Yeah.
So you had to wait for a letter to come from some other country to find out how people were living or what they were doing.
Did technology did you get used to it as it happened, or do you still kind of think, whoa, this is like crazy how much technology has improved or increased?
Well, I wondered about the new technology.
Yeah.
How is it going to benefit us? And if it will benefit us in giving us better healthcare or better things to live by, better rules to live by, that's good. But if it's going to cause problems for other people, I wouldn't like to think that.
I think it'll do both.
Yeah.
And I think it'll probably. Yeah. It's like everything. It's like everything. Like you know. It never seems to be only. Everything seems to have a pro and a con. It doesn't.
But I think sometimes it is that we're getting used to the new technology, and we're not likely to agree to all the changes that we need to make for the new technology. But then we get used to it.
Yeah, I think we can't get too carried away. I think the one thing that I kind of disagree with the way that our society is part of our society, not the whole thing, is pushing towards, is that I think that we need to incorporate, like, I love the fact that when you talk about when you were growing up, you know, you would eaten food and crops and things that grow from your area, that you know, that we're not doing silly things that don't make any sense because we have the ability to do it.
Right.
And I think it's like I feel like there's always like a over push and then a correction. Like new technology, it does, as you were saying, in healthcare, it has amazing capabilities. I mean, human life could be extended to. I mean, you're 92 now, and it could very easily be that people from my generation could live well into their 110, 120 more regularly. But at the same time, you know, when you look at wars and things like that, this technology could be used for absolute disastrous intentions.
It could be, but then we also have to think about pollution.
Yeah.
That's pollution is the cause of a lot of ill health.
Absolutely.
And we are inclined to push that pollution to other places by looking for more and more and more, cheaper this, cheaper that, and that's not good because somebody is paying the price. Yeah,
so that's what and I think there's a massive movement for this now. Is a combination of, so you get rid of, so if you for you in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you would have been way more directly connected to food, to the land,
Yeah.
to where to your environment.
Yes.
Which I
but
don't.
we were only able to buy what grew here.
Yeah.
And there was enough vegetables and fruit grown here to keep us healthy. The only thing that I didn't like when I was a child was what we called black bread.
Okay.
We didn't grow enough wheat to make white bread.
Yeah.
So they had to add something to the flour, and it came out as black bread. It was dark looking. And the minute that we were importing just to make white bread, it was like you had used a washing powder to wash the flour to make it sparkling white, because everybody wanted white bread.
Yeah.
And actually what we called black bread was healthier.
Yeah, yeah.
So the same could be said about a lot of things. But we had fruit that was growing freely in the bushes. If you went out of in the country, you could pick blackberries.
Yeah.
And there were wild fruits growing too, and you could pick mushrooms if you knew the right mushrooms to pick. So there was that.
But then at the same time you had
rabbits. We had an abundance of rabbits.
Yeah.
And I remember eating rabbits when we were children that were sold in the fishmongers or the butchers or whatever. And there was nothing wrong with the rabbits, but they became the country became overrun by rabbits that something had to be done, because they were eating the food that was growing.
Oh, yeah.
And not the people. And they introduced a thing called myxomatosis into the rabbit community, and nobody would eat rabbits after that. I haven't eaten a rabbit for years, and I can remember it as being lovely, although as a child I wouldn't have thought of it as a real creature. We didn't think of meat in those terms as children, because we never went to a farm.
Well, it's the same now. I think so. But what I was going to say was that you had all that, but at the same time, then you had the Catholic Church. You also had, in terms of healthcare or basic protocols around things, they just weren't non-existent.
No,
viruses and all, they just didn't have the same.
They didn't have
understanding.
The same impact. No, but there weren't as many viruses. There were serious things. There was polio.
Yeah, no, but what I mean is that people didn't have the same understanding of how to deal with illnesses or treatment. So I think there's a nice balance where you don't get rid of everything that was in the past, but you obviously get rid of the stuff that really just does not work.
Right.
But so there's a combination. And what do you think what do you think from if you could go back to being a kid now in the 30s and you look and you see what's happened now, what do you think is what are you most shocked by that's actually happened in the country?
I think the idea of the cost of housing. Okay. That is a huge thing in everybody's life, because it's important that you have somewhere to live. And it also means that you have to be able to live near to work. Otherwise you have to have a car to drive miles and miles. And that's pollution again. Yeah. And I think it's also important to have free education. Yeah. I think that's one of the most important. Everybody should be entitled to an education. It shouldn't be because you have money you're educated, and because you don't have money you're not educated. That shouldn't be. So it means that we have to change how we're doing some of the things we're doing now, which is make it's difficult for everyone to afford to go to school. Although I heard on the radio this morning that children are going to get the money for their school books to go to secondary school.
Oh, right, that's great.
So that's good.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. But who's going to pay for that?
Someone.
We'd have to pay more taxes. So there's one way of doing things, but yeah, somebody has to pay.
Okay, my last question is what, being 92 years of age, what do you think? What is your one? Not that's one, but like, what's your one sort of? What have you learned about through 92 years about
that
life
it
and
is
living?
essential to have a sense of humour. Because if you haven't got a sense of humour, you're lost.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we'll stop there.